What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? I've told this story before. I'm an eye doctor and I had a patient come to me with an infected eyelid. Two other eye doctors tried to treat and failed. They were dumping all sorts of medicine into it and it wasn't getting any better. At this point, it was swollen and painful for weeks with no improvement despite being on tons of meds. Apparently, neither of them thought to flip the lid upside down. You know that gross trick some kids do with their upper eyelids? It was a painful maneuver for her very swollen eyelid, which might explain it. Anyhow, there appeared to be what looked like a visible abscess inside the tissue with thick gooey material. I thought I'd give it a nudge and saw it move. This wasn't an abscess. It was something else. I managed to remove it quite easily in one whole piece. It was a fly larva. The patient told me that she had a bug hit her in the eye a few days before she got this infection. I removed the larva and within 2 days the wound closed and she was 100% recovered on basic antibiotic eye drops. Yes, I do have the photos from this case for those interested. TLDR. Patient had a bug lay an egg in her eyelid and I removed the larva. I had brain surgery roughly 3 years ago. I lost my concept of time. What felt like 4 months was only 3 days. The amount of physical, mental, and emotional pain I went through was crazy. I had to find all of my memories and relearn how to walk, talk, everything. If you want to go through something terrifying, that is it. The story of John Edward Jones getting stuck in Nutty Putty Cave in Utah. He became wedged in the tight craft. When he took a wrong turn in the cave system, rescuers could do nothing to get him out and he was stuck in there for 28 hours before he died from cardiac arrest because feet were above his head and his heart was pumping over time. One of the rescuers even gave him a phone to call his wife and talk to his young daughter before he died. Ill account. I used to love swimming. I'd go snorkeling, scuba diving, even jumped off a few sea elves into the water. When I was about 18 I read the Necronomicon, the collection of Lovecraft short stories. Not the real thing. Had a good scare. Giggled at how silly I was to be unnerved and went about my life. Next year went to Crete on holiday. First day I jumped right into the ocean with my dad and went out deep. Lo and behold, I feel something tickling my legs. I dive under to see since it's too deep for seaweed to reach this high and I wanted to see fish. Tentacles everywhere. I was so shocked I lost my air and panicked hard. I started breathing in water as glowing eyes, sharp beaks and suckered tentacles flashed about me. Thankfully, Dad got me to the shore and didn't understand what was going on. He'd seen nothing but suddenly had a really grim look on his face. Went to the doctors. Turns out I'm the victim of a family curse. Schizoaffective disorder. My dad was horrified, 'cause since he hadn't got it like his brother and mother, he thought I'd be safe. They caught it early, but this revelation then led to a lot of aspects of my life being thrown in the air. Entire people in my life became false. Ideas I'd had were delusional. Outbursts revealed to be due to mood swings. I'm doing much better now. I still don't go in the water. This thread is probably dead now. But when I was about 4 and my brother 11, we stayed at my aunt's between moving house. Her neighbor had a son my brother's age, so my bro used to go play with him on weekends. One day my brother goes over after lunch. The dad opens the door, says the kids and Mur are out shopping, but come on in and have some juice and tell him about how the move is going. My bro goes in, has a drink and a chat, then comes back to my aunt's after no more than an hour. A few days later police are all over the place. Turns out the dad murdered his wife and kids, and was in the middle of burying them in the back garden. Around the time my brother knocked Crazy to think what could be different if my brother had visited a couple of hours before, or caught that guy on an off day. I'm a crime writer and once interviewed a Warren who told me an unrelated horror story about something that happened to her as a girl. When she was like 10, she had trouble sleeping and imagined the boogeyman was living in her closet, staring at her during the night. Every night she would come down and tell her parents, and every night her father would tell her the boogeyman didn't exist and she should go back to bed. Well, this happened for several nights and the father got tired of it, so that night he walked her back to her bedroom, turned on the light, and said, "I'll show you there's no boogeyman," and went to open the closet door. But something on the other side held it shut. He sent his daughter out of the room and forced the door open, to find that a man was inside. He'd been sneaking into their house every night to stand in the G's closet and watch her, and maybe more. He beat the ever-loving shit out of the man and the man went to prison. When I interviewed this woman, I looked him up online. He'd recently gotten out on parole and had skipped out on his weekly checks. There was a warrant out for his arrest and nobody knew where he was anymore. Edit. People are asking for the source. I googled his name for the first time in years and, well, the good news is, he's in prison again. Walking my dog and crossing the street with a green light and a guy blows through the red light and almost hits me and the dog. I yell, "Asshole," and he slams on his brakes and turns around and pulls into parking lot sheet of me. I get closer and see the car has Illinois plates. I live in PA. He says, "Careful who call asshole, I've killed people." I just keep walking and he drives away. The next day I hear spree killer Andrew Cunanan used a stolen credit card at a gas station in my town. 100% was him. I called a asshole. One day as a kid I was exploring the forests near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars. Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope, and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl. In that forest a guy walking his dog found it, after the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater. While staring at the backpack, we stopped exploring the forests after. Edit. English is hard sometimes. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake that is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. I think the story of Tina Fey getting the scare on her face is super fucked up. She was a kid just sitting and playing in her front yard when a random guy pulled up, got out of his car and slashed her face for no reason with a razor. Wit. When I was a kid we lived on a large acreage. One night we came home late and as we entered the driveway we noticed a car pulled over down the road against the ditch that bordered our property. We saw two people, one of them climbing out of the ditch. When we parked my mom told my dad to go see if they were okay or needed help. My dad said that they looked to be okay and it was probably not a good idea, so we all went in and to bed. The next morning we were woken up by the police. They had our whole yard taped off because some horseback riders had noticed a leg sticking out of a black plastic bag in the ditch exactly where that car was parked. That look on my mom's face I'll never forget. We know for sure my dad wouldn't have made it back home alive if he had listened to my mom that night. When I was young, I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. Edit. It was a fungus, not bacteria, apparently. I was in the drunk tank with a guy who beat another man to death. The guy didn't die immediately. Was in intensive care for 3 days, then died in the hospital. The man who killed him told me specific details about it, and on the 3rd day, when the guy in IC died, the co's came in the cell and put him in isolation across the hall. They left him in general pop until the guy actually died, and once he was officially charged with capital murder. Then they took him out of our cell. I was 17 at the time. Never forget being scared to fall asleep right next to this dude. When I worked in healthcare, I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly, he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friends told him they were near his distant uncle's house. Horn he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened. And afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims.